For 16 years, my husband left the house every Sunday morning. He said he was going to work. I believed him, until the morning he left a black prepaid phone on our kitchen counter. When it rang, a woman's voice asked why he was late to see their 16-year-old son. I didn't scream. I tracked down the address. What I found wasn't just a second family living 20 minutes away. It was also a $500,000 mortgage bearing my forged signature. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Welcome back. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from. For 16 years, my husband disappeared every Sunday morning. 16 years of early client meetings, charity board breakfasts, and helping his college buddy winterize the boat. I can do the math. 832 Sundays, 832 mornings I stood at the stove in our 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville, flipping buttermilk pancakes while he put on his coat. I was the good, trusting wife. I never questioned the routine. I never checked his pockets. It was a freezing February morning. The kitchen smelled of vanilla extract and brewing coffee. Our golden retriever, Barnaby, lay stationed by the oven, waiting for a drop of batter to hit the floor. David stood by the front door, pulling his wool scarf around his neck, adjusting the knot in the hall mirror. "Don't wait up for lunch, Elle," he called out, checking his watch. "The Peterson deal is an absolute nightmare. I'll be buried in paperwork until 3. He turned and flashed that reliable, dimpled smile. It was the exact same smile he had used to ask me out when we were 25. He crossed the kitchen, kissed the top of my head, and grabbed his travel mug. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him. The deadbolt slid into place. The house settled into its usual Sunday quiet. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the scrape of my spatula against the cast iron. Then, a vibration. Bzzz. Bzzz. It wasn't his work phone. I had just watched him slide that into his breast pocket. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, leaving the stove on simmer. The sound came from the far corner of the kitchen island, tucked deep in the shadow between the ceramic fruit bowl and the stainless steel toaster. It was a sleek, black device with a cracked screen protector. A prepaid model, the kind you buy at a pharmacy with cash. It shouldn't have been there. I stared at it. The screen lit up, casting a harsh blue glow against the granite counter. There was no caller ID, there was no phone number, just a single letter, S. My hand moved before my brain issued any formal command. I reached into the narrow space, pulled the phone out, and swiped the green button. I lifted the cold plastic to my ear. I did not say hello. "Are you on your way yet?" The voice was female, low, intimate, and entirely stripped of any formal courtesy. It was the voice of a woman standing in her own kitchen, speaking to a man who belonged there. My throat closed. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, holding my breath so completely my lungs burned. "David?" She sighed. The sound was familiar, heavily layered with domestic impatience. A cabinet door slammed shut in the background. "The contractor is coming at 9 to look at the master bath. You promised you would be here for this. And your son is throwing an absolute fit about his soccer cleats." "Your son?" Our son Leo was fast asleep upstairs in his bedroom. He played baseball. He was 16. I pulled the phone away from my ear and set it down on the counter with deliberate slowness. The granite was freezing. I pressed my palms flat against the stone, locking my elbows to pin down the violent shaking in my hands. I watched the call timer tick on the screen. 15 seconds. 18. 20. She disconnected. The screen shifted to a lock prompt. 6 blank circles waiting for a passcode. I stood in the silence of my kitchen. I typed our anniversary. Incorrect. I typed our daughter's birthday. Incorrect. I typed the year we bought this house, the year he started his brokerage firm, the last 4 digits of his social security number. Incorrect. 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 I stopped. I stared at the blinking cursor. I thought about the voice on the other end of the line. The casual authority. The complaint about the cleats. Your son. I typed Leo's exact birth date. August 12th, 2010. 081210. The phone unlocked. The home screen appeared, devoid of any apps except the basics. I opened the contacts. There was only one entry. I tapped the letter S. An address sat neatly below a local phone number. I pulled a crumpled grocery receipt from the pocket of my robe. I grabbed a pen from the junk drawer. My hand jerked across the paper, leaving a jagged, unrecognizable scrawl. 1142 Willow Creek Drive. It was a gated community in the next town over. A 20-minute drive. 20 minutes away. For 16 years. I turned off the stove. I left the half-cooked pancake sitting in the pan. I walked to the hallway and grabbed my car keys from the brass hook. I didn't go upstairs to check on the kids. I didn't change out of my jeans and oversized sweater. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. I didn't know what I was going to find at that address. But the woman who had flipped those pancakes 10 minutes ago was already gone. The woman steering the SUV out of the driveway now was someone else entirely. The wrought iron gates at the entrance of Willow Creek Drive were designed to keep people out, but a commercial landscaping truck with a trailing flatbed was just pulling through. I eased my foot off the brake and slipped my SUV right in behind it, tailgating the trailer until we cleared the security cameras. Number 1142 was halfway down the block. It was a sprawling, immaculate brick two-story with manicured boxwoods and a wide, sweeping driveway. A silver Lexus SUV sat parked by the garage. I pulled to the curb 3 houses down, killing the engine. My hands remained locked on the steering wheel. The digital clock on the dashboard read 8:41 a.m. At 8:44 a.m., the front door of 1142 opened. David stepped out onto the porch. He was not wearing the charcoal wool coat and tailored suit he had put on 30 minutes ago for the Peterson deal. He was wearing a faded gray sweatshirt, denim jeans, and running shoes. He was laughing, looking back over his shoulder into the house. A boy walked out right behind him. He was tall, lanky, with a heavy sports bag slung over one shoulder and a pair of neon green soccer cleats dangling from his left hand. The boy turned his head to catch something David tossed to him. The profile was unmistakable. The slope of the nose, the heavy, dark eyebrows, the exact set of the jaw. He was a carbon copy of the man standing next to him. But it wasn't the resemblance that made the breath stop completely in my lungs. It was his height, his build. The boy was not 8. He was not 12. He was 16 years old. Leo was 16. The math clicked into place with the sickening, heavy thud of a vault door locking shut. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This wasn't a mistake he made 5 years ago. This boy was conceived at the exact same time I was picking out floral arrangements for our wedding. A woman appeared in the doorway. She had dark hair pulled into a messy knot, wearing leggings and a cashmere cardigan. She handed David a travel mug. He leaned in, wrapping his free arm around her waist, and kissed her. It was not a rushed, stolen kiss. It was the easy, thoughtless, comfortable kiss of a man standing on his own front porch. The boy groaned, rolling his eyes, and started walking toward the silver Lexus. David chuckled, patted the woman's arm, and followed him. I did not scream. I did not slam my palms against the horn. I sat in the freezing silence of my car and watched my husband pull out of a driveway that wasn't mine, with a son who wasn't mine, to go to a soccer game I didn't know existed. When they turned the corner, I started the engine. I drove back to Naperville in total silence. I walked through my front door at 9:15 a.m. The kitchen still smelled of vanilla and the burnt edges of the pancake I had abandoned. Barnaby looked up from his spot by the oven, thumping his tail once. I walked straight to the kitchen island. The black prepaid phone was sitting exactly where I had found it. I wiped the screen with my sleeve, erasing any trace of my fingerprints, and wedged it back into the shadow between the fruit bowl and the toaster. I scraped the ruined pancake into the garbage disposal. I washed the pan. I poured fresh batter. At 9:28 a.m., the front door unlocked. I did not turn around. I kept my eyes focused on the bubbling edges of the batter. "Forgot my phone," David's voice called out from the hallway. His footsteps moved across the hardwood. I heard the rustle of his coat. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him reach toward the fruit bowl. The swift, practiced motion of a man who had done this 100 times before. The phone vanished into his pocket. "Everything okay?" I asked, flipping the pancake. My voice was entirely flat. "Yeah, fine. Just scattered this morning," he said. He walked up behind me. I forced my spine to remain relaxed when he placed a hand on my lower back. "You look exhausted, Elle. Are you sleeping okay?" "I'm fine." "You work too hard during the week," he murmured, stepping away toward the espresso machine. "Go sit down. I'll make your coffee." I turned the stove off and sat at the kitchen island. I watched his back as he moved around the counter. I watched his hands. For the last 3 years, the fatigue had been a constant, heavy blanket over my life. I had gone to 3 different doctors complaining of brain fog, lethargy, and a bizarre heaviness in my limbs that hit me every Sunday afternoon and lingered through Tuesday. They told me it was stress. They told me it was early perimenopause. They told me to rest. David had been incredibly supportive. Every Sunday, he made me a specific dark roast coffee. He encouraged me to take long naps. He took over the Sunday afternoon chores so I could sleep. He walked back to the island and set a ceramic mug in front of me. Steam curled off the top, carrying the sweet, heavy scent of toasted sugar. "Here's your coffee," he said, pushing it an inch closer to my hands. "I added extra caramel like you like it, so you can take a good nap." I looked at the dark liquid. Then I looked up at his face. The reliable, dimpled smile. The absolute picture of a caring husband. "Thank you, David," I said. I picked up the mug. I brought it to my lips and took a sip. I held the hot liquid in my mouth without swallowing. He nodded, satisfied that I had taken it, and checked his watch. "I really have to get to the office. The Peterson files aren't going to organize themselves." "Have a good day." He walked out. The door clicked shut. I stood up, leaned over the stainless steel sink, and spat the coffee down the drain. I walked to the pantry and found a small, sterilized glass jar I usually used for storing spices. I poured 3 ounces of the caramel coffee into the glass, sealed the metal lid tight, and dumped the rest of the mug down the disposal. I rinsed the ceramic cup until the water ran perfectly clear. On Monday morning, while David was actually at his brokerage firm, I drove to an independent toxicology lab in Chicago. I paid the $400 expedited testing fee in cash. I registered the sample under a fake name, provided an untraceable email address I had created that morning in a coffee shop, and requested a full pharmaceutical panel. I went home. I cooked dinner. I asked Leo about his history paper. I smiled when David asked about my day. I did not drink anything he handed me. By Wednesday, the perpetual fog in my head had completely lifted. My thoughts were sharp. The heavy, dragging exhaustion in my muscles was gone. On Thursday afternoon, I was sitting at my home office desk when the notification popped up on my screen. New message, test results, sample number 8842. I click the encrypted link. A sterile black and white PDF loaded on the screen. I scrolled past the basic chemical breakdowns, past the caffeine levels, down to the flagged anomalies section. There was only one line highlighted in red. Substance detected, lorazepam. Concentration, 2.5 milligrams per deciliter, high clinical dosage. I stared at the glowing letters, lorazepam. a potent prescription-grade benzodiazepine used for severe anxiety and sedation, a central nervous system depressant. He wasn't just keeping a second family. He wasn't just managing his time. He was dosing me. Every Sunday for 3 years, he had been chemically putting his wife to sleep so he could live his actual life without interference. He was manufacturing my medical history, turning me into a chronically exhausted, unstable woman right in front of my own children. I closed the laptop. The silence in the house felt entirely different now. It wasn't the quiet of a peaceful suburban afternoon. It was the quiet of a crime scene. The performance began on Friday morning. David stood at the kitchen counter, humming a low tune as he stirred my coffee. I sat at the island, wearing an oversized fleece robe, resting my chin in my hand. I let my eyelids droop. I made my shoulders slump. "Here you go, Elle," he said, setting the heavy ceramic mug in front of me. Steam rose from the dark liquid, carrying the familiar, sickeningly sweet scent of caramel. "Drink up. You need the energy." I wrapped both hands around the warm mug. I gave him a slow, vacant smile. "Thank you. I just feel so heavy today." He walked around the island and pressed a kiss to the top of my head. His hand lingered on my shoulder, a gesture of deep, manufactured concern. "You look so pale lately. Maybe I should call Dr. Evans again. We might need to look at adjusting your dosage, or maybe exploring an inpatient evaluation if this fatigue doesn't break." I stared at the granite countertop. An inpatient evaluation. "Maybe," I murmured. "I'll handle it," he said softly. "You just rest." He grabbed his briefcase and walked out the front door. The deadbolt engaged. I sat completely still for 60 seconds, listening to the hum of his car engine fade down the street. The moment the sound vanished, my spine snapped straight. The fog evaporated. I carried the mug to the sink, dumped the poisoned coffee down the drain, and ran the garbage disposal for 10 seconds to wash away the caramel residue. I walked upstairs to my home office and locked the door. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and bypassed my standard browser. I didn't need to check his bank accounts. A man hiding a 16-year double life wouldn't leave a paper trail in a joint checking account. I needed to look at the bedrock. I pulled my comprehensive tri-bureau credit report. The document loaded on the screen, a dense grid of numbers and dates. I scrolled past the 30-year fixed mortgage on our Naperville house. I scrolled past the auto loan for my SUV. I scrolled past the 2 joint credit cards we paid off every month. My finger froze on the trackpad. Under the open accounts section, there was a third mortgage, originated in October 2008. Exactly 2 months before I found out I was pregnant with Leo. Balance, $412,500. Property address, 1142 Willow Creek Drive. Primary borrower, Samantha Hayes. Co-signer, Elena Marsh. I stared at my own name on the screen. He hadn't just bought them a house. He had bought it using my ghost. He had forged my signature and used my social security number to guarantee a $500,000 asset for his mistress. For 16 years, the roof over that boy's head had been legally anchored to my identity. If David and Samantha stopped paying, the bank wouldn't come after him. They would come after me. I printed the entire 40-page credit report. At noon, I drove to a Home Depot 3 towns over. I paid cash for a SentrySafe fireproof lockbox, heavy enough that the cashier had to help me lift it into the trunk of my SUV. I carried the 40-pound steel box down into our unfinished basement. The air smelled of damp concrete and old cardboard. I dragged it to the furthest, darkest corner, shoving it behind a stack of heavy plastic bins labeled Christmas Ornaments 2012. David hadn't touched the holiday decorations in a decade. I locked the credit report inside. At 10 p.m., the shower was running in the master bathroom. I slipped into David's study. The room was dark except for the street lamp filtering through the blinds. His MacBook sat closed on the mahogany desk. I opened the lid. The screen illuminated my face. Password. I didn't try our anniversary. I typed 081210. Leo's exact birth date. The desktop loaded immediately. I opened his mail application. I didn't bother with the inbox. Men who cover their tracks delete their incoming mail. I clicked on the sent folder. I typed Samantha into the search bar. Nothing. I typed Willow Creek. Nothing. I sat back, staring at the screen. What was his endgame? If he had been building a medical history of my mental instability for 3 years, he wasn't planning on a standard divorce. I cleared the search bar. I typed, attorney, a single email populated. Sent 3 weeks ago to a partner at a family law firm in downtown Chicago. Subject, draft review. Attachment, marsh_petition_v3.pdfi, double-clicked the PDF. The legal document expanded across the screen. I scrolled past the standard filing headers down to the grounds for the petition. Respondent has exhibited severe, documented psychological decline over the past 36 months. Respondent suffers from chronic lethargy, paranoia, and an inability to maintain basic household functions. Petitioner seeks sole physical and legal custody of the minor child, Leo Marsh, as respondent is medically unfit to parent. Furthermore, petitioner requests the court grant emergency medical power of attorney to facilitate respondent's transfer to a long-term psychiatric care facility. My nails dug into the leather arms of the desk chair. He didn't just want the house. He didn't just want the money. He wanted to legally declare me insane, take my son and lock me in a ward while he moved his other family into the life I had built. The shower shut off in the master bathroom. I closed the PDF. I quit the mail application. I shut the laptop perfectly, adjusting it so it aligned exactly with the edge of the leather desk pad, just as I had found it. I stepped out of the study and walked softly down the hallway. By the time David opened the bathroom door, a towel wrapped around his waist, I was already in bed. I was lying under the duvet, my eyes closed, breathing in the slow, rhythmic cadence of a heavily medicated woman. I drove to Oak Brook on Tuesday morning, taking the scenic route to ensure I wasn't being followed. I parked 2 blocks away from the brick townhouse and walked the rest of the way, carrying a thick manila folder tucked under my arm. Aunt Ruth opened the door before I could knock. She was 71, a retired regional director for a major commercial bank, and a woman who had never tolerated a fool in her entire life. She took one look at my face, stepped aside, and locked the deadbolt the second I crossed the threshold. We sat in her sunroom. The winter light was harsh and unforgiving across the glass table. I did not cry. I simply opened the folder and slid the printed credit report and the toxicology results across the smooth surface. Ruth put on her reading glasses. The silence in the room stretched for 10 minutes. The only sound was the crisp turn of the pages and the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I watched her manicured finger trace the lines of the Willow Creek mortgage, pausing on the origination dates, moving down to the cosigner details. She took off her glasses and set them gently on the table. He bypassed the secondary verification, Ruth said, her voice dropping into the clinical, authoritative register she used to fire branch managers. A mortgage of this size, with a cosigner who never appeared in person for the closing. Someone on the inside pushed this paper through. Someone stamped it. I nodded. Ruth leaned back, her dark eyes locking onto mine. That bastard has been using your identity since 2008. And the other paper, I said quietly. She glanced at the toxicology report. Her jaw tightened so hard the muscles jumped beneath her skin. I am going to make a phone call. Ruth walked into her study. I sat in the sunroom, watching the bare branches of the oak tree scrape against the window. For the first time in 3 years, my mind was entirely my own. The residual chemical haze was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. 10 minutes later, Ruth returned holding a slip of paper. "You have an appointment at 2 o'clock today, downtown Chicago. Her name is Patricia Hollis. She does not lose." Patricia Hollis operated out of a corner office on the 42nd floor, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass that made the city look like a grid, waiting to be manipulated. She wore a tailored navy suit and didn't offer me coffee. She reviewed the same documents Ruth had. She read faster, making 3 precise notes on a legal pad. "If you confront him now," Patricia said, tapping her silver pen against the desk, "he will panic. He will drain the joint accounts, leverage his position, and use this fabricated medical history to file an emergency custody order. The courts move slowly. He has a 3-year head start on the narrative that you are mentally unfit." "I am not leaving my son," I said. "You aren't," Patricia replied smoothly, "but we are not going to fight him on his terms. If we file for a standard divorce today, we enter a messy, prolonged negotiation over marital assets. We are going to sidestep the divorce entirely for now." She slid a blank sheet of paper to the center of the desk and drew a wide circle. "We establish an irrevocable trust," she explained. "We move the house in Naperville, your personal savings, and your family inheritance into it. We make Leo the primary beneficiary. Once an asset crosses the threshold into an irrevocable trust, it is legally walled off. It ceases to be marital property. David cannot touch it. He cannot claim it in a settlement. He will notice if I ask him to sign away the house." Patricia smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant expression. "He will sign it if he believes it's part of your mental decline. You are going to tell him you are terrified of the future. You are going to beg him to protect Leo's inheritance because you feel yourself slipping away. A narcissist presented with total control will never read the fine print." I looked down at the circle on the paper. "And the fraudulent debt? The Willow Creek house?" "That debt is tied to your Social Security number, but the signatures are forged. When the time comes, the federal authorities will handle the fraud. But for now, you go home. You take the coffee he hands you, and you pour it down the drain." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "We're going to let him keep acting until he signs his own death warrant." I left the city as rush-hour traffic began to clog the interstates. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the lawn. When I walked through the front door, David was not home yet. But the mail had been brought in and left on the kitchen island. Sitting on top of the pile was a thick, certified envelope addressed to me. The return address belonged to a family law firm in Chicago. The trap was already moving. I picked up the envelope, slid it into my purse unopened, and went to the sink to prepare the coffee mugs for tomorrow morning. I was standing in the produce aisle at Trader Joe's on a Thursday afternoon, inspecting a carton of cherry tomatoes. The store was quiet, filled with the low hum of refrigeration units and the faint squeak of rubber cartwheels on linoleum. I placed the tomatoes into the child seat of my cart. I had spent the morning reviewing the trust documents Patricia Hollis had mailed, committing the legal phrasing to memory before locking them in the fireproof safe downstairs. My mind was sharp. The residual chemical weight of the lorazepam was entirely out of my system. "Oh, excuse me." A woman reached past my shoulder to grab a bundle of asparagus. I stepped back, turning to offer a polite, reflexive apology. The words died in my throat. She had a sleek, dark blowout today, not the messy knot I had seen from the street on Sunday. She wore a tailored camel coat over a charcoal-sheath dress, her makeup impeccable, smelling faintly of expensive jasmine perfume. Samantha Hayes. She placed the asparagus in her basket. She looked at me, her gaze sweeping over my oversized sweater, my bare face, and the messy ponytail I had thrown my hair into that morning. I saw the flash of recognition in her eyes. It was instantaneous. She didn't look away. She didn't hurry down the aisle. Instead, her lips curved into a soft, practiced smile. "You're Elena, aren't you? David's wife?" My hands gripped the cold metal handle of the shopping cart. I forced the muscles in my face to relax, adopting the slightly confused, sluggish expression of the woman she expected me to be. "Yes," I said slowly, letting a slight hesitation drag the word down. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "We haven't met officially." She extended a manicured hand. "I'm Samantha. I handle a lot of the commercial financing for David's brokerage firm. I've seen your photos in his office." I looked at her outstretched hand. I raised my own and briefly touched her fingers. Her skin was warm. "It's nice to meet you," I murmured, breaking eye contact to look blankly at the shelves. She didn't move on. She stepped slightly closer, tilting her head with an expression of profound, manufactured sympathy. "David mentions you often. He told me you've been dealing with some health issues lately. Chronic fatigue, right? That must be so incredibly difficult for you." The audacity was staggering. She was standing in the middle of a grocery store making direct eye contact with the wife of the man she had been sleeping with for 16 years, probing the exact medical lie her lover had been manufacturing. She wanted to see it for herself. She wanted to look at the broken, medicated woman she was replacing. "I have good days and bad days," I said, keeping my voice faint. "Well, you are so lucky to have him," Samantha said smoothly. Her voice was the exact low, intimate register I had heard through the phone. "He's so devoted. He worries about you constantly. He really carries the weight of the whole family on his shoulders. You must be very proud." "I am." She adjusted the lapel of her coat. As she moved, the fabric parted slightly, revealing a navy blue lanyard hanging around her neck. It held a hard plastic ID badge. The logo at the top was a gold sail. Coastal Heritage Bank. Beneath the logo, printed in bold black lettering, "Samantha Hayes, Senior Underwriter." The air in my lungs turned to ice. Coastal Heritage Bank. The exact institution listed on my pulled credit report. The bank that held a $500,000 mortgage originating in 2008. A loan with a forged co-signer signature requires someone on the inside to bypass the identity verification protocols. It requires an underwriter to look the other way, stamp the approval, and bury the paperwork. "I should let you finish your shopping," Samantha said, pulling her coat tight again. "Take care of yourself, Elena. I'm sure things will work out exactly the way they are supposed to." "Thank you, Samantha," I said, offering a slow, vacant smile. "Have a good afternoon." I watched her walk away, her heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I did not leave my cart. I did not run out of the store. I walked down the next 3 aisles, placed a box of steel-cut oats, a bag of coffee beans, and a carton of milk into the cart, and paid at the register. I loaded the groceries into the trunk of my SUV. I got into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and pulled my phone from my purse. Patricia answered on the second ring. "She's an underwriter at Coastal Heritage Bank," I said. Silence hung on the line for 3 seconds. The sharp scratch of a pen against paper echoed through the speaker. "Are you absolutely certain?" Patricia asked. I just stood 2 feet away from her security badge. "Coastal Heritage, the same bank that holds the Willow Creek mortgage." "Elena." Patricia's voice was stripped of all its usual professional detachment. "She isn't just a mistress. If she pushed that paper through using her position at the bank, she is a co-conspirator to federal wire fraud and identity theft." "She didn't just sleep with him," I said, staring at the steering wheel. "She funded their life with my name." "Do not confront her," Patricia ordered sharply. "Do not contact the bank. I am engaging the forensic accountant to subpoena the original 2008 loan origination documents. If her signature is on the underwriter approval line, she's going to federal prison." I ended the call. I drove home. The afternoon sun was casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway when I pulled into the garage. I carried the paper bags into the kitchen, unpacked the milk into the refrigerator, and loaded the coffee beans into the grinder. I walked into the living room to fold a blanket that had been left draped over the armchair. I stopped. The living room was completely silent. The ceiling fan was still. The television was off. I looked up. Directly above the television, mounted to the drywall, was the smoke detector. David had replaced it 3 weeks ago. He had spent an hour on a Saturday afternoon standing on a step stool, complaining about the wiring of the old unit, drilling new anchor holes into the ceiling. A tiny pinpoint reflection caught the afternoon light. It was a black dot, no larger than the head of a pin, embedded in the plastic casing facing directly downward at the sofa. My blood went cold. Respondent has exhibited severe, documented psychological decline. The phrasing from the draft divorce petition echoed in my skull. He wasn't just writing a narrative, he was building a video archive. He was recording his wife slumping on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, unable to function. He was gathering the visual evidence required to walk into a courtroom and demand emergency custody and psychiatric committal. I did not stare at the ceiling. I did not freeze. I continued the motion of my arms, picking up the throw blanket, smoothing the fabric with slow, deliberate hands. I walked over to the sofa, directly into the center of the camera's frame. I sat down heavily. I let my shoulders round forward. I rested my elbows on my knees and let my head drop into my hands. The perfect picture of a woman collapsing under the weight of her own failing mind. I sat there for 45 minutes, staring at the floorboards, breathing deeply. He wanted a performance. I was going to give him an Oscar-winning one. The red light inside the smoke detector was invisible during the daylight hours. You would only know it was there if you knew exactly what angle to look from. I didn't look up. I sat on the center cushion of the living room sofa, directly in the middle of the camera's wide-angle frame. It was 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. David always took his mid-morning coffee break at 10:15. I knew he was sitting in his corner office, scrolling through the live feed on his phone, checking the progress of his investment. I wore the same oversized gray sweatpants I had worn for 3 days. My hair was tied in a loose, greasy knot. A bowl of cold oatmeal sat on the coffee table, untouched. I picked up a glass of water from the coaster. I let my hand tremble, a deliberate, jerky movement. The glass slipped from my fingers. It hit the hardwood floor, shattering into jagged shards, splashing water across the oak planks. I didn't jump. I didn't gasp. I slowly lowered myself to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I sat inches from the broken glass, staring blankly at the expanding puddle. I stayed in that exact position for 22 minutes. I was the perfect tragic portrait of a woman whose mind had simply stopped functioning. When the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11, I stood up. I walked out of the living room, stepping perfectly out of the camera's field of vision. The moment I crossed the threshold into the hallway blind spot, my posture snapped straight. I tied my hair back tight. I walked quietly down the stairs into the unfinished basement, pulling the heavy steel key from the pocket of my sweatpants. The sentry safe was still hidden behind the holiday decorations. I unlocked it. Inside sat 3 thick manila folders. The first contained the toxicology report from the Chicago lab. The highlighted line detailing the 2.5 milligrams per deciliter concentration of lorazepam in my blood. The second folder held the 2008 origination documents for the Willow Creek mortgage. Patricia Hollis had acquired them through a forensic accountant. I flipped to page 14. The underwriter's signature was scrawled in black ink across the bottom line. Samantha Hayes. Below it, the digital stamp from Coastal Heritage Bank. She had approved a $500,000 loan backed by a forged signature, using her corporate credentials to bypass the identity verification protocol. The third folder was my own contribution. I had spent the weekend mapping the IP addresses used to log into our joint accounts over the past decade. 54 separate logins originated from a static IP registered to the Coastal Heritage Bank corporate network. She hadn't just approved the loan, she had been actively monitoring our finances from her office desk for years. I pulled 3 United States Postal Service priority mail envelopes from the bottom of the safe. I slid copies of the documents into each one. I addressed the first to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division in Chicago. I addressed the second to the Regional Field Office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I sealed them. I pressed the adhesive edges down until they were completely flat. I did not write a return address. On Thursday night, the house was dark. I was lying in the master bed, breathing in a slow, heavy rhythm. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11:42 p.m. David's side of the bed was empty. I slipped out from under the duvet, stepping silently barefoot onto the carpet. I walked out into the second-floor hallway. A thin sliver of yellow light spilled from beneath the door of his study. I moved to the top of the staircase, pressing my back against the wall, perfectly still. David was speaking. His voice was hushed, stripped of its usual booming confidence, reduced to a tight, urgent murmur. "I know," he said. The floorboards creaked as he paced. "I saw the feed today. It's almost done. She's declining fast. I have all the footage we need for the petition." A pause. He was listening. "No. The timeline stands," he whispered sharply. "I am submitting the paperwork this weekend. The judge will grant the emergency medical hold. Once she's in the facility, I have full power of attorney. We just need to wait 3 more days." Another pause. "I love you too. Kiss him for me." The line clicked dead. I walked backward, silently retreating into the shadows of the master bedroom. I slid beneath the covers and closed my eyes just as the study door opened. He climbed into bed a minute later, settling into the mattress beside me. He reached over and pulled the blanket up to cover my shoulder. Friday afternoon, the priority mail envelopes were stacked neatly inside my leather tote bag. I was standing at the kitchen island, drinking a glass of cold water. Patricia and I had coordinated the timeline. I was going to drive to the main post office at 3 o'clock. The federal agencies would have the dossiers on their desks by Monday morning. The digital clock on the microwave read 2:15 p.m. A deep, mechanical rumble vibrated through the floorboards. I stopped breathing. The glass halted halfway to my mouth. It was the garage door opening. David never came home before 6 o'clock on a Friday. He always hosted a late afternoon recap meeting with his brokerage team. I set the glass down. I pushed my tote bag off the stool, letting it drop to the floor, kicking it quickly under the overhang of the island counter. I slumped my shoulders forward. I let my eyes glaze over. The heavy door leading from the garage swung open. David stepped into the kitchen. He was still wearing his suit, but his tie was loosened. His jaw was set in a hard, rigid line. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't playing the concerned, attentive husband. He was holding a thick, legal-sized folder stamped with the logo of a Chicago family law firm. He walked directly to the kitchen island and tossed the heavy folder onto the granite. The thick stack of paper hit the stone with a sharp, definitive slap. "We need to talk," he said. The heavy folder sat on the granite island, the gold-embossed logo of the Chicago family law firm catching the afternoon light. David did not take off his coat. He stood on the opposite side of the counter, his hands resting flat on the stone. The mask of the devoted, exhausted husband was firmly in place. His brow was furrowed, his shoulders carrying the manufactured weight of a tragedy only he knew about. "Sit down, Elena," he said. His voice was soft, carrying the terrifying, reasonable tone of a man speaking to a volatile child. I pulled the wooden stool out and sat. I kept my shoulders slumped, my hands resting limply in my lap. I did not look at the folder. I looked at his tie. He reached out and flipped the heavy cardstock cover open. "I have spent 3 years trying to save you," David began, his eyes fixed on my face. "I have taken you to doctors. I have adjusted my work schedule. I have covered for you with Leo, with our friends, with my own family. But I can't do it anymore. You are disappearing, Elle, and you are taking the stability of this household down with you." I let out a slow, shallow breath. I stared blankly at the first page of the document: marital settlement and medical proxy agreement. "What is this?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound thin and reedy. David reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his silver Mont Blanc pen. He laid it precisely next to the paper. "It's a voluntary separation and asset transfer," he said smoothly. "You are going to sign over your equity in this house and transfer primary custody of Leo to me. In exchange, I am going to fully fund a long-term residential treatment program for you at the Oak Ridge Psychiatric Institute. They have a bed waiting for you today." The sheer scale of the audacity chilled the air in the room. He wasn't just taking the money, he was erasing me. He had orchestrated a chemical lobotomy, documented the fallout, and was now presenting my incarceration as an act of profound mercy. "I don't want to go to a hospital," I whispered, pulling my arms around my waist. "I just need to rest, David. I'm just tired." "You are beyond tired," he snapped, the edge of his real temper briefly piercing the act. He caught himself, taking a deep breath, lowering his pitch back to a soothing hum. "Elena, look at yourself. You are sitting in the dark in the middle of the day. You drop things. You stare at the walls. You can't even hold a conversation. Leo is terrified of you." I flinched. The mention of my son's name was a deliberate surgical strike. "I won't sign it," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You can't make me leave my house." David leaned forward across the granite. The ambient warmth completely vanished from his eyes. "I am trying to give you dignity," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If you do not sign these papers right now, I am making a phone call. I have a private medical transport waiting 2 blocks away. I have months of video evidence of your psychological collapse. If I show that footage to the paramedics and a judge, they will place you under an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold. You will be strapped to a gurney and carried out of your own front door while the neighbors watch." He let the silence hang in the kitchen. He was giving me time to visualize the threat, the flashing lights, the paramedics, the ultimate public humiliation. "If you sign," he continued softly, "you pack a bag. We walk to the car together. You go quietly, and Leo remembers his mother holding her head high." He tapped the silver pen. "Sign the papers, Elle, for Leo's sake." I looked at the silver pen. I looked at the little yellow sticky flags marking the signature lines on 4 separate pages. If I refused, he would call the transport. He would produce the footage. I would have to break my cover, call Patricia, and engage in a messy, immediate legal war on the floor of my kitchen, tipping him off to everything I knew before the federal authorities had time to open their mail. I reached out and picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen. My hand trembled. I didn't have to fake that part. The adrenaline surging through my veins was raw and violent. I pulled the first page toward me. I pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. For 16 years, my signature had been a fluid, looping Elena M. Marsh. When Patricia and I had drafted the irrevocable trust earlier in the week, she had instructed me to establish a duress signature, a specific legally registered variation of my handwriting that I would only use if physically coerced or threatened. I gripped the pen tightly. I dropped the middle initial. I crossed the T in a jagged backward stroke that I had never used in my life. I signed the bottom of page 1. Elena Marsh. David exhaled. It was a faint, sharp sound of absolute triumph. I flipped to the deed transfer. I signed it. I flipped to the custody arrangement. I signed it. I flipped to the medical proxy. I signed it. I set the pen down. David immediately pulled the folder back across the counter. He closed it, his hands moving with rapid, practiced efficiency. He didn't look at my face anymore. He didn't need to. I was no longer a person to him. I was a finalized transaction. Go upstairs and pack a small bag, he commanded, checking his watch. It was 2:45 p.m. I need to run these down to the bank before the wire cutoff at 3. They need to be notarized and entered into escrow to release the funds for Oak Ridge. You're leaving? I asked, staring at the counter. I will be back in exactly 40 minutes, he said, grabbing his car keys from the bowl. Have your bag by the door. Do not make this harder than it has to be. He turned and walked to the garage door. He didn't look back. He didn't offer a final word of comfort. The performance was over. He had the paper. The heavy door slammed shut. The engine of his car roared to life, vibrating through the floorboards, and then faded rapidly down the street. I sat alone in the quiet kitchen. He was going to the bank. He was going to Coastal Heritage Bank. He was taking a fraudulently obtained deed transfer directly to the institution currently under investigation by the federal government, likely walking straight to Samantha Hayes' desk to process the paperwork. I stood up from the stool. I walked over to the kitchen sink and turned on the cold water. I splashed it over my face, washing away the sluggish, blank expression I had worn for 5 days. I dried my face with a towel. I did not go upstairs to pack a bag. I picked up my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a Chicago area code. Hollis, the voice answered on the first ring. He took the bait, I said, staring out the window at the empty driveway. He has the papers. He's walking into Coastal Heritage Bank right now. Excellent, Patricia said. Her voice was pure ice. The FBI executed the freeze order on his accounts at 2 p.m. The IRS flagged the bank's internal servers at 2:15 p.m. I watched a pair of robins land on the front lawn. What happens now? I asked. Now, Patricia replied, we let the system do exactly what it was designed to do. 4 hours later, the grand ballroom of the Naperville Country Club was packed. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 50 circular tables draped in white linen. The clink of silverware against fine china and the low, steady hum of affluent networking filled the cavernous room. At the front, flanked by massive floral arrangements, a projector screen displayed the logo of the Northern Illinois Real Estate Association. I stood in the shadows of the double mahogany doors at the back of the hall. I was not wearing sweatpants. I was not holding a packed duffel bag waiting for a psychiatric transport van. I wore a tailored emerald green sheath dress, a pair of black stiletto pumps, and a coat of dark red lipstick. My spine was perfectly straight. My mind was entirely clear. Patricia Hollis stood to my right, her arms crossed over her navy blazer. She gave me a single, sharp nod. On the stage, David stepped up to the acrylic podium. The crowd offered a generous round of applause. He was holding a heavy crystal plaque, Realtor of the Year. He leaned into the microphone, adjusting his tuxedo jacket, projecting the exact image of a humble, hard-working family man. Thank you. David's voice echoed through the surround sound speakers, rich and saturated with manufactured emotion. This award means the world to me, but success in this industry isn't built in a vacuum. It requires a foundation. A rock. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the silent, attentive audience. My wife, Elena, couldn't be here tonight. Many of you know she has been fighting a severe, ongoing battle with her health. It has been the hardest season of our lives. He lowered his head slightly, a masterful display of stoic grief. Every deal I close, every late night I work, I do it for her, to ensure she gets the care she needs. This award is for her. A collective, sympathetic murmur rolled through the ballroom. At a table in the second row, Samantha Hayes raised her champagne flute. She was wearing a stunning backless black gown, playing the role of the supportive industry colleague. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open. The hinges let out a low groan, but my heels striking the polished hardwood floor were what turned the heads of the people at the back tables. The rhythmic, deliberate click, 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 cut, straight through the ambient noise. The applause died. A wave of confusion rippled forward as people parted to let me walk down the center aisle. David looked up. His fingers tightened around the edges of the acrylic podium. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. He glanced frantically toward the side exit, then back at me, his mind clearly failing to process why I was not currently strapped to a gurney in a transport vehicle. He gripped the microphone. He was a professional. He tried to pivot. "Elena," he said, forcing a wavering, concerned smile. "Honey, you shouldn't be out of bed. The doctors said—" "The doctors didn't say anything, David." I projected my voice clearly across the silent room. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. But the federal lab in Chicago had plenty to say. Up in the AV booth, Patricia's paralegal inserted a flash drive into the main console. The NIREA logo on the massive screen behind David vanished. It was replaced by a sterile black and white PDF. The toxicology report. Substance detected, lorazepam. Concentration, 2.5 milligrams per deciliter. The ballroom went entirely still. The kind of stillness that precedes a localized earthquake. "I don't know what this is," David stammered, stepping back from the podium. His voice bounced awkwardly off the microphone. He looked at the crowd, raising his hands in a gesture of desperate surrender. "Please, everyone, I apologize. My wife is suffering from severe schizophrenia. She's having a paranoid episode. She needs immediate medical intervention." The screen flashed. The toxicology report disappeared. A scanned copy of the 2008 Coastal Heritage Bank mortgage populated the massive display. A red digital circle highlighted the primary borrower's name, Samantha Hayes. A second circle highlighted the forged cosigner's signature. A third circle zeroed in on the underwriter's approval stamp at the bottom. In the second row, a wine glass shattered. Samantha had dropped her champagne flute. She was standing up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. She wasn't looking at David. She was looking at the back of the room. 4 men and 2 women in dark suits had quietly entered through the service doors, fanning out to block the exits. They did not wear windbreakers with bright yellow lettering. They didn't need to. The rigid posture and the earpieces communicated their authority perfectly. David spun around to look at the screen. He saw the deed. He saw Samantha's name. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "You hacked my computer," he hissed, his voice dropping the public cadence entirely, leaning over the edge of the stage toward me. The microphone picked up the raw, panicked venom in his throat. "You forged this. You're insane. I have the medical proxy. I have your signature." "You have a duress signature registered with the state of Illinois 48 hours ago," I said calmly, looking up at him. "It voids every document in that folder." The lead agent walked down the center aisle, passing me without a word. He stepped up the side stairs of the stage. "David Marsh," the agent said. He didn't use a microphone, but the absolute silence in the room carried his voice to the back walls. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud." David backed away until his shoulders hit the projector screen. He looked out at the 50 tables of his peers, his competitors, his clients. He looked at the men in the audience who had played golf with him for a decade. None of them moved. None of them offered a word of defense. They stared at him with the cold, fascinated horror reserved for a man burning alive in public. "This is a mistake," David shouted, his voice finally cracking, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She's sick. She's out of her mind. Look at her." I didn't blink. You call it mental illness, David. I let the silence hold for 2 seconds. The federal government calls it first-degree identity fraud and attempted murder. 2 agents flanked him. They grabbed his arms, pulling them behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting of the handcuffs echoed sharply through the microphone before an agent reached over and killed the audio feed. Down in the second row, Samantha Hayes was moving. She abandoned her purse on the table, hiking up the skirt of her black gown, making a hard, desperate pivot toward the kitchen corridor. She pushed past a waiter, her heels slipping on the polished wood. A female agent stepped out from the shadow of the swinging kitchen doors. Samantha Hayes, the agent said, producing a badge from her jacket pocket. Coastal Heritage Bank. Put your hands against the wall. Samantha froze. The immaculate, composed marketing facade dissolved. She looked back at the stage, watching David being hauled down the steps by his belt and collar. She looked at me. There was no defiance left in her eyes, only the hollow, frantic realization that the life she had funded with my name was over. She slowly turned around and placed her manicured hands flat against the floral wallpaper. The agents escorted David up the center aisle. As he drew level with me, he stopped pulling against the cuffs. He looked at my face, searching for a trace of the sluggish, drugged woman he had manipulated for 3 years. He searched for the naive girl he had married 16 years ago. He found nothing. "Elena," he whispered. It was a pathetic, empty sound. I turned my back to him and walked toward the exit. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open, stepping out into the cool, crisp night air of the parking lot, leaving him to the authorities and the judgment of a silent room. It took Samantha Hayes exactly 48 hours in a federal holding cell to trade 16 years of romance for a plea agreement. Patricia and I sat side by side in a windowless conference room at the United States Attorney's Office in downtown Chicago, watching the interrogation footage on a flat-screen monitor. The woman on the screen bore zero resemblance to the immaculate, composed underwriter who had approached me in the produce aisle. The backless black gown and the tailored camel coat were gone, replaced by a drab, oversized gray jumpsuit. Her sleek blowout had collapsed into a tangled knot. She sat hunched over a scarred steel table, her hands trembling so violently she couldn't hold the paper cup of water the federal agents had offered her. She didn't ask for a lawyer to fight the charges. She asked for a lawyer to cut a deal. The assistant U.S. attorney pressed a button on the keyboard, fast-forwarding the timestamp to the moment the dam broke. "I just followed his orders." Samantha's voice cracked through the monitor's speakers, high-pitched and frantic. She pushed a printed stack of emails across the steel table toward the interrogating agents. "He told me she was practically a vegetable. He said he already had the medical proxy. I just stamped what he told me to stamp to expedite the underwriting. He used me. He lied to me too." I watched her face on the screen. The sheer, desperate panic of a woman realizing that the man she had anchored her entire life to was a sinking ship, and she was currently chained to the hull. She handed over his private server passwords. She handed over the routing numbers for the offshore accounts he used to hide his real estate commissions. She handed over the receipts for the lorazepam, purchased through an illicit online pharmacy using prepaid debit cards. Patricia reached out and tapped the spacebar, pausing the video on Samantha's tear-streaked face. "Loyalty among thieves," Patricia murmured, closing her leather portfolio. "It always comes with an expiration date." With Samantha's full cooperation, the federal government moved with terrifying surgical precision. The dominoes didn't just fall, they were obliterated. The $500,000 mortgage on the Willow Creek property, stripped of my forged co-signature, collapsed entirely onto David and Samantha. The bank immediately fired her and called the loan. It took less than a week for the IRS to seize the brick 2-story house under federal asset forfeiture laws. The silver Lexus was towed from the driveway on a Tuesday morning while the neighbors watched from their manicured lawns. David's brokerage firm dissolved his partnership within 48 hours of the arrest, citing the morality clause in his contract. They froze his business assets and locked him out of the building. 3 weeks later, I walked through the metal detectors at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse for David's detention hearing. The judge had already denied bail. The prosecution successfully argued that a man possessing hidden offshore accounts, a second identity, and a demonstrated willingness to systematically poison his spouse was an extreme flight risk and a danger to the community. I stood in the wide, marble-floored hallway outside the courtroom, waiting for the elevator. Leo stood beside me. He was wearing a dark suit, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He hadn't spoken much in the 3 weeks since the gala. He had read the indictments. He had seen the toxicology report. He had packed up all of his baseball trophies and shoved them into the back of his closet. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open. 2 United States Marshals walked out, flanking David. He was wearing the standard-issue orange jumpsuit. His wrists were handcuffed, chained to a thick leather belt strapped around his waist. The tailored suits, the dimpled smile, the aura of the untouchable suburban patriarch, all of it had been completely stripped away. He looked hollowed out. He looked up and saw us standing by the elevator bank. He stopped walking. The marshals tugged on his chain, but he planted his feet on the marble floor, his eyes locking onto Leo. "Leo," David said. His voice echoed off the high ceilings, raw and desperate. "Buddy, please. You have to know I did all of this for us, to protect our family. Just let me explain." I didn't step in front of my son. I didn't shield him. I stayed perfectly still and let Leo handle the moment exactly how he needed to. Leo slowly pulled his hands out of his pockets. He looked at the man who had coached his little league team. He looked at the man who had bought a second house 20 minutes away to raise a secret brother born in the exact same month. He looked at the man who had spent 3 years slipping a potent central nervous system depressant into his mother's morning coffee. Leo's face was completely devoid of anger. It was worse than anger. It was total, absolute indifference. "You're not my father," Leo said. He turned his back, reached out, and pressed the call button for the elevator. David flinched as if he had been physically struck. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. One of the marshals placed a heavy hand on his shoulder and shoved him forward, leading him toward the secure transport corridor. David looked back over his shoulder one last time before the steel doors closed behind him, but neither of us was watching. 9 months later, the sentencing hearing concluded in less than an hour. There was no drawn-out trial. Faced with Samantha's testimony, the forged bank documents, the video camera hidden in our smoke detector, and the lorazepam detected in my blood, David's expensive defense attorneys advised him to plead guilty to every count in exchange for taking the maximum state penalties off the table. I sat in the front row of the gallery. The federal judge, a stern woman with silver hair and zero patience for white-collar theatrics, looked down from the bench. She didn't offer a lecture on morality. She simply read the numbers. Aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud, tampering with consumer products with intent to cause bodily injury. The heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block. The sound was sharp, final, and absolute. 10 years in federal prison. No possibility of early parole. I stood up, smoothed the skirt of my dress, and walked out of the courtroom. It was a Sunday morning in late May. The air coming through the open kitchen windows smelled of freshly cut grass and the faint, smoky promise of a charcoal grill. It did not smell like vanilla extract. I stood at the stainless steel counter of our new house in Evanston. We had sold the Naperville Colonial 8 months ago. I had no interest in living within walls that had concealed lenses, or cooking on an island that had served as a staging ground for my own chemical erasure. The new house was built entirely of clean lines, high ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows. There were no dark corners. Down in the backyard, Barnaby was chasing a tennis ball through the thick clover. Leo stood on the lawn in his baseball cleats, tossing the ball back and forth with his older sister. She had driven down from Northwestern for the long holiday weekend. I watched my son laugh at something she said, a genuine, unburdened sound that carried effortlessly up to the wooden deck. The silent, suffocating anger that had draped over him during the federal trial had finally burned off. He had pitched a complete shutout game on Friday night. I had sat in the front row of the bleachers, cheering until my throat was raw. I didn't miss a single inning. I didn't yawn once. A silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Aunt Ruth stepped out of the passenger side, carrying a massive glass bowl of potato salad. Right behind her, Patricia Hollis emerged from the driver's side. She was wearing dark sunglasses, casual linen trousers, and a rare, relaxed smile. I had invited my attorney to a Sunday family barbecue, and to my surprise, she had accepted without checking her calendar. The financial dust had settled quietly over the winter. The irrevocable trust had performed exactly as Patricia had designed it, acting as an impenetrable fortress around my family's actual assets. The federal government had auctioned off the Willow Creek property, applying the seized equity to the massive restitution David and Samantha owed Coastal Heritage Bank. I didn't just keep my savings. I used the capital to lease a small, brick-walled office space in the city. I didn't work for a corporate firm anymore. I took my own clients. I audited their ledgers, assessed their operational vulnerabilities, and found the hidden leaks in their foundations. I turned back to the kitchen counter. The espresso machine finished its cycle with a soft hiss. I picked up a plain white ceramic mug. I didn't open the refrigerator for milk. I didn't reach into the pantry for sugar. I certainly didn't look for a bottle of heavy caramel syrup. I lifted the mug and took a long, slow sip of the black coffee. It was sharp, bitter, and completely unmasked. It tasted exactly like being awake. I walked out onto the deck, leaning against the warm wooden railing. The late spring sun heated my skin. For 3 years, Sunday mornings had been a manufactured fog, a stolen span of time engineered to keep me docile while my identity was stripped away and handed to a stranger. They had banked on my silence. They had bet everything on my compliance. Now, Sundays belonged entirely to me. I watched my children playfully arguing over who was going to light the charcoal. I raised my mug to Patricia, who offered a subtle, knowing raise of her own iced tea from the lawn. I had spent my professional life evaluating vulnerabilities in complex systems, completely missing the catastrophic breach sitting at my own kitchen table. You can build all the firewalls in the world, but the greatest risk you will ever take is handing the password to your reality over to someone else. I set the coffee down on the railing and walked down the steps to join my family. If the person who slept beside you for 16 years was quietly poisoning your life every single Sunday, how long would it take you to stop drinking the coffee?